Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in again this afternoon for this week's webinar, Exploring Business Issues Related to the Coronavirus Pandemic. This webinar, as you know, is being brought to you by the Smith School of Business and being presented by Smith Business Insight and by Queen's Executive Education. Today's topic is marketing in the age of coronavirus. What comes next? My name is Meredith Dalt, and I'm a business journalist here at Smith School of Business at Queen's University in Kingston. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to remind you, as I always do, that this discussion will be recorded. You will be receiving a link to that recording by email in a couple of days. I also want to mention, if you want to ask a question, and I hope that you will, to please use the Q&A button that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. That is the best way for us to get questions to the panelists, and we will be presenting those questions to the panelists in the second part of the webinar, so stay tuned for that. It's now my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists. Ken Wong is an associate professor and distinguished professor of marketing at Smith School of Business, where he's held both teaching and administrative positions. He's also a Smith alumnus. Professor Wong has received numerous awards for his teaching over the years, including the Financial Post's Leaders in Management Education Award, and was inducted into the Canadian Marketing Hall of Legends in 2006. Sarah Joyce is a Senior Vice President of Ecommerce at Sobeys, as well as a Smith alumna. She has end-to-end accountability for Voila by Sobeys, the company's new online grocery home delivery service, which is launching in the Greater Toronto Area in the next week. I'm sure we'll hear lots about that today. Prior to joining Sobeys, Sarah was at HBC, where she was the general manager of sacksoffifth.com and gilt.com. And finally, Bryan Pearson is the former CEO of LoyaltyOne and currently serves as the director and strategic advisor to a number of different organizations. He's a global leader in customer loyalty, retail marketing and analytics, and a passionate advocate for the ways that marketing, leadership, and culture can transform business performance. Mr. Pearson is also a Smith alumnus and is the author of 2 books on the subject of customer loyalty, and he frequently speaks at retail and marketing conferences around the world. Thank you to all of you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
It's an interesting time, and we are so grateful that people like you are able to speak to us about what's happening in the world. So marketing, we're talking about marketing today. Let's start with the crisis. Let's start at the beginning. From a marketing point of view, and I'm going to direct this to you, Ken, first, and then we'll take it from there. What has surprised you, impressed you, or not impressed you about how brands have been handling the situation from a marketing point of view?
A great question. You know, I think the easy answer would be to talk about messaging and the like, and certainly there have been a lot of changes there. But I think just as we often say that crises bring out the best and the worst in people, we also see crises bringing out the best and the worst in companies and in brands. And I think what we're seeing is the best brands have put profit on the back burner, at least for a quarter. They've come to the realization this isn't business as usual. And so we're going to continue. We're going to continue messaging. In fact, we're going to go even farther than that. We're going to spend a little extra money to make sure the hygiene concerns of our customers are taken care of. We're going to hire extra staff to do curbside delivery and the like. We'll put in place whatever procedures are required. And in some cases, and you think about Subaru and A&W come to mind, we're going to take on some messaging that really isn't trying to generate sales, but trying to generate that emotional tie to our consumer. By contrast, on the other hand, we've seen companies that are gouging prices. We've seen companies that are trying to cut back on costs in order to survive. And in some cases, frankly, they don't have a choice, but it's going to cause them some long-term damage. So we're seeing the best and the worst in both people and in companies.
Oh my goodness, there's so much to unpack there. Before we do that, Sarah, I want to go to you. How about your perspective on marketing? I mean, you're in a different position from Ken. Tell us about what you've been thinking about.
No, I agree with Ken. I think for me, the brands that are doing it the best right now are doing exactly that. They're using their platforms to thank the frontline workers, to remind employees and customers what they're doing to keep them safe. So I agree. I think brands like Coca-Cola was the example that jumped out to me, that they were very public that they were going dark with traditional brand marketing over the next little while. They actually said bye to consumers, and they intentionally shifted things like their social to focus on messages of hope from around the world. And those, to me, that's meeting your customer where they are, and to Ken's point, putting profit on back burner for the sake of actually just making a connection and being there for people in this time.
Great. Bryan.
Yeah, I'll switch gears. I mean, I agree with Ken and with Sarah on the sensitivities and the spirit of community. I think those are definitely there. I think the other thing, looking at the smaller businesses that might be on the line as well, is the ingenuity of the Canadian businesses that you've seen and how they've responded. It was almost like everyone went into self-isolation. There was like a week to 2 week pause. And then all of a sudden you saw, whether it was manufacturers like Canada Goose leaning in on, or Stanfield's leaning in on manufacturing things for the front line on the PPE front, or whether it's just people thinking about how they pivot and take advantage of what situation the consumer finds themselves in, and thinking about products or services that not only help them from a viability standpoint, but really are also adding value to all of us who are sitting at home these days.
So speaking of consumers, like looking again at that high level position, what about consumer behavior? What have you guys been thinking about in that regard? Anyone?
So I've been thinking really about how consumer behavior will be once the dust settles, because it's going to be dramatically different, and it's going to create a whole new normal for us. We are never going to go back to what we were pre-epidemic. Consumers now have an extended period of time to get used to this world and to get used to the world of e-commerce. I mean, e-commerce, COVID didn't cause e-commerce. E-commerce was well on the way, 16 billion in sales in January of this year alone on e-commerce. But there were some people who were holding out, and those people haven't had a choice now. They've had to go on e-commerce. And, it takes anywhere from 21 to 28 days to create a habit. And this epidemic is going to be around for a long time. You're going to see e-commerce grow even faster than it has historically. And that has some dangerous messages, frankly, for some of the small and medium-sized enterprises Bryan was referring to.
Yeah, and I would jump in on that a little bit further, because I think I agree with Ken. You always look for things that are kind of like jump balls in the market, where it's a disruptive force that causes people to reevaluate their existing and I think that the
Uh-oh. Bryan, you're cutting out.
there. The research I've seen, yeah, the research I'm cutting out, sorry.
Yeah.
The research I've seen is that 20 to 25% of consumers are already saying, and this was a week into the self-isolation, that they were going to be looking at e-commerce solutions for their general shopping and obviously for groceries. So it's very much a quick shift.
So speaking of groceries, Sarah, this is your moment. I mean, tell us, you're in the middle of a huge e-commerce shift, and you're at the helm of it, I think, or quite involved. Tell us about introduce us to what's happening, and then maybe you can reflect on what the current situation is doing to that process for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no question that this is going to accelerate digital transformations for probably every industry, but grocery is the most obvious example, mostly because of how underpenetrated it was prior to COVID. So, grocery penetration as a percentage of sales, particularly within Canada, was the lowest of your retail categories. And what we're seeing now is it's about 3 times higher. And the expectation is that it will stay 2 times higher. So this is a large structural shift, and it is absolutely here to stay, potentially not to the levels that we're seeing in the current peak, but definitely at least 2 times what it was. So if it wasn't on your radar before, it's on your radar now. I think both as a consumer who finally understands the need and the value of a service, but also from the perspective of the company, where you may not have been willing to make the investment before, but now you understand that the return is there, the customer's asking for it, and this is absolutely the place you need to be. So I think it's a catalyst for a lot of change on both sides.
So, I mean, you're in fact heading up a quite significant venture that Sobeys is undertaking in the e-commerce space. Do you want to just briefly bring us all up to speed on that?
Sure. So yes, we will be testing next week. So we're T-4 away from launch date, but we are launching an online grocery home delivery service called Voila by Sobeys in the Greater Toronto area. And, we've always believed in the growth of e-commerce, which is kind of interesting because we've decided to take on a large scale automation. It's a robotic warehouse, $100 million capital build to serve our e-commerce business. So we've been at this for a couple of years, building this facility that will allow us to serve e-commerce with scale. And so now, as you can imagine, a couple weeks away from our launch and the whole world changes around us. So what's been super interesting for me is one, we've never been needed more, and we now have the opportunity to bring grocery home delivery to Canadians in the moment where they really need food. And that's just an amazing mission to be able to accomplish. But it's also been an interesting business exercise, which I'm sure this group would be intrigued about, which is, you're weeks away from a multi-year launch plan. How do you change every element of your plan to adapt to the current environment? How do you change your assortment? Because now not every product you thought you were going to be able to carry is widely available. How do you change your delivery process? Because now instead of a white glove delivery, you're doing contactless delivery, and you're introducing tons of safety measures around masks and gloves and cleaning and sanitation and really putting customer and employee safety at the forefront. How do you change your marketing, which this group probably cares even more about? We've talked so much about how we don't have to market anymore. Almost like you have demand that previously wasn't there, and now what you're seeing is there's too much demand, that a lot of people are struggling to have enough capacity to keep up with the demand that's out there. So your problem shifts on its head. So you're decreasing your spend, you're focusing more on digital channels. If you, in the marketing that you are doing, you're changing your messaging and your tone, the way we talked about earlier. So pretty much every element of the plan we're adjusting in the final weeks, which just shows you not just the way that we need to operate, but every company, whether you're launching, whether you're large and stable, everybody right now is changing every element. And making sure that you adapt as needed, given the world we're in.
It's
Ken.
fascinating to me that if you had asked me a month ago, what's the likelihood you'll be turning to your clients and saying, positioning in the future will be about product availability, it'll be about delivery service, it'll be about the hygiene of your stores, my clients probably would have finished the retainer. And sent me packing on my way looking for something more glamorous. But for this next little while, if you think about it, there's 3 stages. You got to survive the onslaught, you got to revive the business, and then you got to grow the business. And under the revive the business, we're going to find it's going to be a different world. We're going to be talking about things in a much more functional way. I hope we don't lose the emotional tie to the consumer, but that'll be the challenge, presenting this pragmatic messaging in an emotionally compelling way.
And Ken, can I just give a perfect example of what you're describing in terms of changing messaging, right? So, and benefits, because the benefits that matter before don't matter the same way, to your point. So yes, in grocery, people are going to care about freshness. They're going to care about pricing. They're going to care that we show up on time. But we've noticed now that there are elements that they will care about that we can lean into around safety. So for us, robots, we had so many conversations about, do customers want to know that we use robots? Well, now they probably do, because it's safer and with less handling. And so things like that you can lean into and out of, depending on what matters. And right now, actually knowing that we handle products safely and we do it from a warehouse that is centrally controlled and actually robotic, in combination with the teammates that we have that will drive and deliver and be part of the service experience, is now increasingly important. So perfect example.
It's funny, isn't it? After years of stressing customer service and our staff expertise and attention, now we're talking about contactless delivery. You'll never see anybody when you come into our stores who come in.
Right.
Whoa, that's a bleak future. Bryan, I want to ask you, with all of this in mind, we've got robots doing groceries. Like, what's the role of data in all of this?
Yeah, I think, first of all, back to Ken's comment earlier, it's been very interesting just to watch, because I think that there's a lot of companies out there who didn't pay attention to the consumer data, didn't either have a loyalty program or some customer experience program, which allowed them to, maintain contacts and have a longitudinal view of what their customers are doing. And, that mimics very much what's happening in the side, where a lot of smaller mid-size companies sorry,
you're cutting out a lot. This is the flaw with the Zoom
I have
Zoom
no
panel.
idea. You guys are perfect. So
no, all right, keep going.
okay, so anyways, I think that it's similar to e-commerce. I think you find a lot of people who are missing out on a key asset in being able to move through the three phases that Ken talked about, and data and customer information is there, and it serves two purposes. One is to understand, to use it from a market research or from a just looking at the data analytics to predict what might happen and to watch the trends change. And then the second thing is to use it as a contact mechanism to actually create outreach to consumers to share, for example, some of the many positioning things that Sarah talked about with respect to Voila. So data is one of the key trends that I think we're going to see companies turn their attention to as we move through the next phase and into longer term planning. They will recognize that that is a critical gap if they don't have it today.
And if they don't have it, anyone?
If they don't have it, I think it's going to be that much harder to wind your way out of this, and they will be at a disadvantage to those organizations that have a robust data set that they can lean on, or a wide customer file. And I think a lot of people established it and then neglected those programs. And in the neglect, they've got now, contacts that aren't current, and they're finding that their loyalty programs or their customer contact programs aren't the rich source of information or strategic leverage that they could have. So I think we will see longer term that more companies will put something on the horizon. It may not be a loyalty program, but it may well be something which causes the consumer to want to put their hand up and say, I'm willing to share information, or I'm willing to be communicated to, and that will be a part of everyone's strategy, especially in the retail environment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Brian. And I think it's not just on the revenue generation side, it's also on the cost reduction side. Inventory management is going to be absolutely critical. You can't have dead inventory. We know the consumer is going to come out of this more price sensitive with a shift towards value-based resellers. And as a consequence, we're going to have to manage prices and costs accordingly. And analytics is one of the best ways to do that. It really comes down to understanding what's a good cost, what's a bad cost, and how you can alter that balance.
Yeah, or Ken, where you're going to actually invest. So if you've got surplus product, or even in Sarah's case, she might have a limited capacity for a period of time versus the demand that might be out there. So how do you prioritize that? What customers are you going to engage? Who are you going to actually test this with? Those are all things that a robust set of information and customer contacts allows you to be much more thoughtful around how you go forward in the marketplace.
And if you can tie that into artificial intelligence, now you can get messaging out to your clients without human intervention. Yeah. So that the moment, for example, Sarah sees that she's a little short on something, she can be sending out emails to people who have bought that product, letting them know what the current supply situation is.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, Sarah's been nodding. Sorry, Ken.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if we learned one thing watching the politicians on TV, we really want straight information.
And Sarah, you were nodding a lot through that. Do you want to weigh in on the Sobeys, the actual Sobeys position, or your own experience?
Well, no, just I was agreeing that without the data, you would struggle to connect with your customer, let alone serve them. So it's a huge advantage for the people who have had both of those. And then you're absolutely right with online grocery, with these big long queues. A lot of times people now are trying to, how do you prioritize through your vulnerable populations, your senior populations? How do you even prioritize some of your loyal customers? Because imagine the experience for someone who's been with you every week who now can't get through. And our partner in technology is Ocado from the UK. And they've been doing a lot of work in this area. They just stopped accepting new customers because to them, they wanted to show the loyalty to the people who have been loyal to them. And they have also prioritized their own employees, because in the spirit of, you know, you got to help yourself before you can help someone else. You know, if the delivery teammates can't get their own food, how are they? So I think choices like that are only made possible if you have the data to make those types of choices.
Right, interesting. I want to pivot things a little bit back to something that you all touched on earlier, is that the fact that brands have been, through this crisis, really positioning themselves as kind of softer, I care about the consumer, you know, that kind of thing. We're helpful, we're useful. What can we do for you? Do you think that's going to stick? How do you think that's going to go as things kind of improve, presuming they do? How do you think that goes, Bryan?
I think, well, first of all, we'd already seen a rise in the last 2 to 5 years of companies doing more value-based communication, trying to establish where they sit on ESG, the causes that they're supporting, and sort of being out a bit more on the forefront of that. I think that's equally important to two constituents. One is the external customer, but even more important in some ways to your employee base. And so I think we've already seen that. I think the helpful, useful piece will gradually ramp down as we approach whatever new normal is. I kind of call it new normal and then real normal, which if it's like 9/11 and what Ken said right off the head, we're never getting back to normal. It's going to be new normal. So, and so I think, as you're moving through and as you ramp this down, the tone and focus will sort of emerge through these phases as the business moves through. We're going to have to address customer concerns. As Sarah said, around hygiene. I think that's going to be something which we'll see for 6 to at least 18 months, if not longer. And then the other thing is, other trends that will come along, which again, I think communications will reflect. Is there going to be a shift to a preponderance of people looking for more local, right? So is local going to be a key theme? Are things like, are there going to be other alternatives to how you engage the consumer? So your services, as they evolve, the consumer is going to need orientation. For a lot of Canadians, shopping online was not the norm. It was a new experience. And so even now when you go into stores and there's routing and standing in line and 6 feet apart and all the wonderful things like that, how do we move through the next phase to new normal? And what's that opening up look like, and how is the retail community going to engage the customer through that? I think there's a lot to unpack in the next little while.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been hard to demonstrate social values and social consciousness. It's one thing to say, we're concerned with our frontline workers. It's a different thing to set aside 2 hours for them to come to the store or make appointments for them or what have you. And I think what you'll see is that the focus on social consciousness isn't going to change, but we're going to have to look for more innovative and more visible ways of communicating the fact that we really do have it. Otherwise, our messaging won't seem authentic.
Right. What about this notion that some people have floated that companies there may be some sort of general gaslighting that happens where companies start to try to help you forget that this even happened, and that in fact they can fill the emotional void that this strange, unparalleled situation has born in us?
I love the term. I came across it. I actually had to look up the definition. So it's playing psychological games with people, making them believe that something is completely different than what has actually occurred.
That's right.
So for anybody who is also like me, heard gaslighting for the first time, that's what it is, roughly.
Seems counter to Ken's authenticity comment from 5 seconds ago, though. So this is good. The making of a good panel.
No, so but I mean, it's a legit question. Like, can a company be genuinely interested in its customers when it suits them and then tell them something else a year later? Like, how does this work? You guys are the experts.
Let science dictate.
Pardon?
Just let science dictate.
Okay.
Don't try and do something we're not. We're marketers, we're merchandisers, we're analysts. We're not doctors. We're not scientists in that regard. And so I think as long as we play by science, we don't have a problem. It's when we step outside science that we start to become Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Whoa, can you just expand on that a little bit, please, Ken?
So Trump tries to make everything about the narrative, right? Everything comes back to reflect on him and his administration. And he tries to spin the narrative. There's no narrative to spin on COVID-19.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that the genuineness of how companies come through this, and if they're really, I think we're going to see a bumpy sort of way out of this, and as people move through, they're going to have to be very agile and very nimble in their communications. And to Ken's point, the reality is what the reality is. The government's going to dictate how things open up and how we move along, and whether there's a second wave of some form. All those things are going to be, you kind of have to operate on two levels. One is, where are you taking your brand over the long term? What are the things you're doing to effectively make sure that you're staking the course to get you to the destination, but reacting all the way along in an iterative manner to the market conditions. And so to actually go out and say that, no, everything's normal, which is the gaslighting thing, and there's no virus, and I don't know what you're worried. I would hope that most Canadians wouldn't lean in on that. B, I think that to Ken's point, the science and government will be what it will be. I think companies need to be transparent and open and really continue down the path of how the communications have been and how they will feel out the right time to move back to more traditional branding activities.
Now, that said, in the interest, and I realize I may be talking out of both sides of my mouth here, but in true marketer concern for segmentation, there will probably be a segment of consumers that would warm to a gaslighted product, right? Just as there are people who, vote in ways that we sometimes think is contrary to what's in their best interest. It would not be inconceivable to me for a restaurant to come on the market and say, we know you're tired of being inside and so on. And, here's a chance to break free and go back to the life as we know it. And it will appeal to some people, a small number of people, probably a shrinking number of people over time as they ignore the advice. But I'm sure there will be a segment. So, I hope the audience doesn't, we're talking about the mainstream consumer here, but there will always be factions who will go for something a little bit different.
As long as phones are tracking their presence, Ken, and I don't have to go near them, then I'll be fine with that.
That's right.
But I do think, Meredith, to your point, just like we were talking about the challenges of adapting to the environment, the challenge for marketers is just as hard coming out of it. So I talked about dialing back spend, dialing back messaging. Well, when do you dial back up? Right. And when is it okay to start to give your hard-hitting brand reasons to believe? And when is it okay to give your hard-hitting promotions? Because I still go back to what I said on the very first question about meeting customers where they are. So the importance of getting that timing right and turning it all back on with the same amount of adaptability, but also care as you did when you turned it off. So.
Yikes, that's tough stuff. That's big decisions. Can I just ask you, we're starting to get some questions coming in from the audience, and I might as well throw this one out because it's sort of related to what we've been talking about. So in addition to gaslighting, what's the risk of too much window dressing that brands care? So this person says, for example, safety washing, like we had with greenwashing. Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I'll dive in. I think anything dialed up to 10 or 12 or whatever is probably going to cause you a challenge one way or another. And I think people, again, it's a little what Sarah just said, which is it's going to be this very tenuous give and take over the next little while of what the right level is. One of the places I would point is really about CEO messaging. I think a lot of CEOs came out early and sort of letters to their customers and everything else like that. I think there might be a CEO washing at some point where at some stage, as you start to evolve and things open up, do we need to hear from that individual or is new normal really about the brands taking over the dialogue and going forward? And so I think a lot of it needs to be just demonstrated. It'll be a footnote of here's what we're doing for safety. And if somebody wants to go find out about it on a website or some communications that they can click through and get more information, but it might not be the number one message of what you're doing. I'm sure Sarah's.
Yeah, but more importantly, exactly. Put your money where your mouth is and show it. Don't just say it, which was what Ken had said earlier. And, this is now a shameless plug, but if I take Sobeys corporate, yes, we did the CEO letters. Yes, we had a video that was one big family, which was to unite Canadians. But what I like is that was also supported with the tactics. Like we put plexiglass up first and within days, and we, increased our hero pay for our frontline workers first within Canada, you know, per hourly and across the week. So like putting your money where your mouth is, making those investments that show you're doing it, not just saying that you are. So I think I've personally been very proud of Sobeys and the way we've handled ourselves. And I think ultimately, you know, the two cultural values that I've seen emerge, or the two organizational traits that I think are most important, one is empathy, and the second is agility. And so for me, it's, if you have the empathy that you truly mean it, and then you have the agility that you're actually doing something about it and doing something about it quickly. Those are just things I've observed and seeing the way that we have handled it at Sobeys.
You know what, Sarah and Bryan raise an interesting point here, and that is that responses to COVID, it's not an idea where we sit around the table and try and come up with cute ideas or cute gimmicks. These programs are all founded and rooted really in a corporate philosophy about how to treat consumers and how to treat employees. And if you sort of sat back and asked yourself, all right, if one of our corporate values is that we value our employees, now the question is, what do we do to protect them at these times? As opposed to sitting around and saying, oh, maybe we should put plexiglass up at the cash registers. You know, you can come up with cute programs forever. It's not going to move the needle. You really want to be grounded here. You know, brands are about the promise that they're set up to deliver.
Yeah, and I was just going to add in, so I'm glad you said that, Ken, because you know, we talk a lot of branding and we think out. Internal branding is even more important in these times over the next little while. And to Sarah's point, if an employee can see that their company is living the values that they espouse and that they are delivering on those things in their words, their actions, where the dollars go, you know, then they will espouse and actually live the brand for the end consumer as well. And so it is this whole branding circle that really just needs to be completely interconnected. Cannot.
Well, and you just gave the formula for employee engagement.
Oh, geez, really? Thanks. And I was just about to add, you know, the other place we haven't really talked about, as Ken talked about merchandising, is back into your supplier network as well. You know, it's how you treat and look at, you know, the whole value proposition and how you create it. And, you know, I think one of the things that's going to be very interesting over the next little while, especially in the retail framework, especially Main Street retail, independent retail, and small chains, is what's going to happen with the rent situation in the very near future. It's, I mean, it's critical. May 1st is coming up, and you know, a lot of these sorts of organizations are hand to mouth. They're not spending billions helping Sarah set up Voila. They're effectively living hand to mouth, providing services to their local communities. And I think, you know, I think that there's going to be a lot. The government has to move on that in the very, very near future to be very clear on what's happening.
Well, certainly, I know that I'm in Kingston, Ontario. I know businesses are closing on our main streets. What's going to be the impact on the buy local? There has been this movement towards buy local. What does that look like at the other side of this, given what you've just said? Are we dependent on robots for our grocery shopping? Really? You know, or can there be humans?
To be clear, we're robots and teammates.
I know.
I would hate for it to leave that we are not employing. We are building a large business and employing a lot of people.
I know. I meant the actual handling of the groceries. Like it's it's the opposite of the farmer's market, let's say. So what happens in those cases, those very, very small retailers?
Well, I mean, I might talk for Sarah here, but I think the question is, how is Sarah and the Sobeys team going to bring local into their stores? They already do it in through the summer months with market goods, et cetera, from local producers. You know, how she's going to integrate it into Voila that's a good question, and I'm sure there's a plan somewhere around that. But in terms of the local retailers, interesting will be whether the government takes the same approach that we're seeing coming out of Europe a little bit, where the Germans, I think the Austrians, I think the Dutch as well, have allowed stores to open, but they've focused more on the local retailer. So things that are under, 2,000 square feet kind of thing in terms of square footage. And that's giving them a little bit of a leg up to be able to start their businesses earlier and sooner and start getting some consumer traffic in. And I think that's certainly something that would be helpful. The larger companies and larger chains are more and better equipped to deal with e-commerce or click and collect kind of situations. So, maybe that levels the playing field a bit over the short term, but there's no question in my mind we're going to see quite a bit of fallout in local communities around that sector of Canadian business. And small businesses represent a large percentage of the total employment in Canada. So we should be paying a lot of attention to that.
Yeah, certainly retail and hospitality, you're going to see a much smaller hospitality sector. A lot of smaller places are going to go under because they are on a hand-to-mouth existence to start with. But the biggest problem they're going to have is in a post-COVID world when people start getting short on cash. They're going to want to shop where they have the best prices. And
Yep.
Smaller local merchants never have the best price. And so we've always encouraged them to justify their price premium by providing a superior customer experience, which now means contactless robots, if you will. And so you got a little bit of a problem now, right?
Right.
And it's not, we used to say, well, what if you want to feel the goods or smell the produce or what have you? Under COVID, you don't want to feel the goods and you don't want to smell the produce. You want to get it home and disinfect it before you consume it. And so I think, local merchants are going to have to come up with something to really personalize. And for example, maybe shopping is by appointment. It's interesting that we keep a store open, a small store, we may keep open for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. But our customers are probably concentrated into a handful of those hours. The rest of the time, we're sitting around with excess and wasted capacity. And you start splitting those customers into appointments. You start making appointments really personal. You start taking a greater, more intimate level of detail about your customers. If I'm a small grocery store, how did you like that cut of beef last week? Could we do something different? Now you can start to justify. And so that's one of the things you'll see. And I think you'll start to see some consortia efforts. In Kingston, we have, the downtown merchants. No individual store can mount an advertising budget to bring people downtown. But maybe 40 or 50 of them combined can make a pretty good effort. And now you're talking, sidewalk sales and whatever else you want, obviously post-pandemic. But you can start talking about creating events that serve as a destination for people to come in and realize you are open in what you've got.
I need to clarify, we do support local. See, now I'm just disclaimering this whole conversation. And we actually work really well with local because you drop in one place and we distribute across the network versus for a small supplier who's trying to make multiple drops. So hugely agree that it's important to continue to support those types of businesses and intend to help distribute their products because they are often great products with great stories, as Ken was alluding to. But then I think, Ken, you triggered a totally different thought for me, which is another just interesting thought through this whole thing, which is how customer expectations have changed. So pre-COVID, we were at the height of, the customer gets whatever they want. And this world you're describing where they have to pre-sign up for an appointment, it's like it's flipping the power. And even, I think about it in my sense because similarly, like the expectations on the perfect delivery experience then compared to the expectations on a delivery experience now, customers are just grateful to get food and they're more forgiving of some of the other elements. So the power has somewhat shifted, it appears, around this perfection expectation to now, something that might be more manageable from the side of the retailer. So you just triggered that thought for me because I'm seeing the evolution now.
I think you're bang on, Sarah. And as I think I said earlier, I think availability is going to be a big driver of consumer preference and selection of where they shop. And in that regard, smaller operations really have a problem. We know already that the major grocery chains and merchandisers have sent letters to their suppliers. When the dust settles, don't forget us. We're still here and we're your biggest accounts. So make sure our shelves are full. And consumers may find, at least in the short term, that they can't find locally products that they can find in national chains just for that reason.
Mhm.
In fact, we've had a question from the audience about how, Sarah, how do stores like Sobeys, how has the COVID situation changed the way stores like Sobeys work with food manufacturers, say big ones like Nestle, Coke, Kellogg's? Have there been changes that have impacted maybe how food's getting to customers?
I mean, I think just true partnership is what I would say, right? Because we both have the same best interest, which is making sure that the food gets on the shelves and gets to the customer. So even if that means changing the assortment so that a supplier can focus on a reduced set and an essential SKU and therefore push out more of it, those types of collective decisions, working together on, okay, what do you have available and how can we make your life easier so you can produce more, that will allow our shelves to be maybe not stocked with everything, but stocked with what we need, and sort of, so I would just say close collaboration, not that it's any different, but it's especially heightened, or it means it brings it out more in times like this.
Right. We do have lots of questions coming in. I'm going to shift gears unless one of you wants to speak more to that point. Otherwise, Bryan, I'm going to ask you this question, which has come in, which is, how will COVID affect loyalty programs going forward? This was...
Yeah, I think I alluded to it earlier, which is I think they will become a more valued asset for organizations as a means to think about how they understand what's happening with their consumers and with the customers that they have. Ultimately, in the short term, I think some companies are probably evaluating what the right investment is, and there's certainly, if you're a food retailer, you don't need to be putting a lot of bonus air miles at Sobeys onto things because the consumer's beating a path to the door. But they'll become that same leverageable asset down the road. And again, I think it depends on whether you see loyalty as I'm creating a customer experience, that's my differentiator, but I want to, within that, understand who my customers are, or whether it's points based. I look at those, they're just different strategies to address the same tactic, which is essentially, who's my customer? What are they buying? How often are they coming in? And how do I build a dialogue with them back and forth? So,
I think too, if I can jump in, Bryan actually taught me about loyalty programs. He was my student, so I taught him everything else, but he taught me about loyalty programs. And, the one thing that he said early on that has always stuck with me is that points are currency. Points are money. And anything you can do with money to promote a product or an operation, you can also do with points in a more measured way, in a way that provides you with some analytic detail coming at the end. And so I think you're going to see people using their loyalty programs as a way of bringing people into the store, not just for more points, because there's only so many toasters and blenders we need, but for access to customer experience, maybe access to products that are in short supply.
yeah, and I think just one more, in the short term, those programs that have a defined cash value, let's say in terms of you can turn it into value back in the store, are also going to have a heightened interest, especially if people are economically looking for ways to make ends meet with job losses, et cetera, over the next little while. So there's a real avenue there.
Yeah, travel points won't be quite as attractive, will they?
No, I thought of that recently, actually. Yeah, it's going to be weird. Sarah, did you want to weigh in on that one with the loyalty, or are you? You're on. It's interestingly on the inside, and these guys are reflecting on the outside. So,
yeah, no, I think part of what Bryan said, right? Like, we're not as promotional overall right now, so you're not using it as a driver of traffic. I think it's still helpful for retention, and it's helpful for all the things that we were talking about in the data conversation, but less helpful for as an acquisition or a traffic driver, and maybe some of the ways that it could have been previously.
Right. Somebody has asked, is this the end of the print flyer? Have we seen the end of it?
No.
Ken says no. No? Print flyers? Nobody wants to touch a newspaper right now, so.
Every grocery chain I've talked to has talked about print flyers as the bane of their existence. They'd love to get rid of them. Problems with regional distribution and the like. Not to mention the cost of production and working with vendors to get those discounts. They'd love to drop them, but the public loves them.
Yeah, and I've been involved in a number of tests where you look at alternatives, and it's, there's a bang for buck factor on a flyer, which is tough to replicate in a digital environment. And, there are digital opportunities that exist, a number of companies that provide online digital expressions of the flyer. Same thing, adoption not quite where, you'd ideally like it to be able to move away from the paper format. So still a few years off.
Yeah, I think the shift of testing the digital version was already happening before all of this. So in this particular period, it's probably getting more attention to your point, Meredith. But I don't think that the print flyer is going away. So I'm in alignment. I think the shift in the testing in digital has already increased. It will probably continue to increase. Just like e-commerce overall relative to store sales, like stores don't go away. The e-commerce might become a bigger share, but bigger than it is today, but not bigger than the stores will be. I think the same is true with the penetration of print versus digital flyer.
Okay, interesting. So here's a very broad and general question, which we'll let you just expound as you will. In your opinions, what will present the biggest opportunity in the next 24 months for marketers? It's a big one, so.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I used to actually distribute these little signs in the company which said, "So what?" with a question mark. And I think that there's any number of things that are going to cause us pause right now where there's opportunities. And I'm going further than retail. I'm going into service-oriented businesses, et cetera. Work from home. What happens when we come out of this where people realize they don't have to fly to take a meeting with people and you can work effectively from home, even if it's not every day? Does that shift it? Does that help Sarah with online retail, where one of the big stumbling blocks to people feeling comfortable at doing it is they're not home? Whereas online retail is great right now because I'm here 24/7 virtually. So what changes if there's going to be more people working from home? How does that affect how we buy and interact with products and services that are out in the marketplace? Another one in the same sort of piece would be the whole element of staying safe, right? And what changes around that? Are there material and ongoing systemic changes which are going to come about? So I think there's a number of things which this is highlighted as key consumer shifts in attitudes and views and whatever else. And the question is, when that goes back to new normal, how much of that sticks, and are there opportunities that come out of that? It's Guy Kawasaki was talking the other day, and he talked about if you'd been really on the ball when the iPhone came out, you would have said, wait a second, people are now being able to take really good pictures with their phones. So what's going to happen coming out of that? Instagram, there's an idea. People are going to want to share these. And, what are the seismic changes that are going to come about because of some of the things that people have worked or have encountered over the last, 4 weeks, 6 weeks sort of time frame?
If I can comment by way of a metaphor, I play an instrument. I don't play it very well. I'm not musical at all. But give me enough time to rehearse and I'll come up with a reasonable facsimile of the song. My daughter, on the other hand, the music major, it just flows. She doesn't have to think about it. It's just natural. I think when it comes to opportunities post-COVID, you're going to see the same thing. You're going to see technical marketers who are able to carry out nice campaigns and do all the things marketers have always done. And then you're going to see a class of marketer who really understands consumers and consumer behavior, who really can put themselves in their shoes. For example, here we are, six weeks of a virtual lockdown. Talking to the CMO at L'Oreal the other day. What do you think is happening? Well, makeup sales are off because people aren't going out, but hair dye sales are up 50% because nobody's going, for their blowout or their color touch up or what have you. And the same thing, you talk to the folks at London Drugs out in BC, COVID hits, all of a sudden they're seeing a massive ramp up in their home office section. People are buying printers and microphones and hands-free units and the like. There are going to be great opportunities. And, a little plug here philosophically, this is a great time to sit back and do analysis. you've got an absence from the market. You're absent, and so are all your competitors. There's no loss to sitting back right now and rethinking what you want to do post-pandemic. And I think the really good companies are sitting there thinking, well, in this new normal, as Bryan puts it, what are people going to be doing? What are they going to need? And that's the stuff we want to make sure we have, as long as we have that relationship.
Yeah, and I would say how much of sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Well, no, so my opportunity that I see, I think ties nicely with both of yours, which is in some ways, there's never been a better time to be a marketer, because what I've seen is that it has accelerated the adoption curve, and it has accelerated the marketing funnel. So people are moving really quickly from awareness to consideration to trial, and they're being forced to trial in a lot of places. So how can you find the opportunity in that, right? Because once someone tries something, they overcome perceived barriers, they might get stuck and become loyal and repeatable. So it has created a gift, which means someone is more likely to try. So how do you use that to accelerate your funnel? And likely you're doing that without spending as much to do it either. So it is a bit of a gift right now. So to the extent that you can find a way to use it, you'll get good feedback. You're in a forgiving environment where customer expectations have changed, and you've got this kind of quick acting marketing funnel.
It's actually amazing. I mean, the principal of Queen's University pointed out that if we had to put all the courses online under normal circumstances, it would have taken a decade. I mean, but we've done it in such a short time. We've got all these courses online. I mean, it's a remarkable opportunity.
That's absolutely right. It forced you from awareness of knowing that you can do virtual courses, consideration of putting courses, to just doing it. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's quite an accomplishment, really. I mean, for universities everywhere, I mean, they're all doing the same thing.
There's actually a message here for the politicians as well. Trudeau today announced a $1.1 billion research program to look into coronavirus and disease prevention and treatment. We could have a national strategy. We can have a national industry. I mean, nobody is in the lead in that field right now. Everybody is looking for the big discovery. It might have been an interesting idea for him to take some of those monies that he's giving away or lending to people and funnel them into some of these industries that we know are now going to become critical moving forward.
So a question that's come in is, what do you think is going to be a trigger that we could be looking for that would let marketers know they can get back to more assertive marketing? I don't know if you, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you can answer that, but maybe you have
a vaccine and a cure.
That's it, huh?
That's
vaccine or bust.
Until we have a vaccine, there's no going back out in public and doing the things that we used to do.
Yeah, there's that's back to the new normal. I agree with Ken. I think people are going to, even as you move towards that, even if there's a relaxation of the ability to go out and stores to open, and even if there's social distancing and they take half the tables out of restaurants, at the end of the day, there's still going to be a segment of the population that has health concerns, or they're in the risk group, and they're going to need Sarah's services more than ever. It's one of those things where the new normal is going to be kind of there to stay. And it's kind of like, the question will be, what's going to be 9/11 like? When 9/11 happened, we went through airports pretty well without care. And now we're totally used to taking laptops out and taking our shoes off and, whatever else as you go through. So what's the new normal that exists in this phase? Because I think people won't forget this for the next little while. What's the lasting impression? What cohort have we created, either within our older population, the sort of baby boom, and how they will react going forward in terms of travel and the consumption of a bunch of services? And then the other end is it the kids. There might be something which is, it's one of those, as Linda Duxbury talks about cohorts, this is one of those seminal moments which is going to shape a whole cohort and generation.
Yikes.
I hope to that point, if I can speak for myself and my generation, I hope the things that stay are some of those. I call it the reverse progression of society, like this whole stay home, cook at home, travel less, work remotely. Like it's a nice reminder to slow down.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some of us that needed to hear that. And you know, for me, if there's anything that happened that might stay, you know, I think and I hope that it's some of those lessons.
Mm-hmm.
So
Agree more.
well, so somebody has asked then, I mean, does that mean that the luxury market is kind of doomed until we can figure out a way around this? Like, are people buying Louis Vuitton purses right now? Like, what happens to that segment?
Depends why you're buying luxury. If you're buying luxury to make a social statement, that market's probably eroding quickly. If you're buying luxury because you really appreciate the quality of the goods and the workmanship and the underlying support, that market will never go away.
Okay. Gosh.
We leave the hard ones for Ken. That was so well said. Yeah. Whew.
Oh man. All right. So what's a big marketing mistake you would say every marketer should avoid right now?
Cutting back on marketing, considering marketing to be a semi-discretionary expense. As Sarah so well put it, this is a time to move. This is a time of great opportunity. You can be a first or early mover. There are a lot of things that you can do in this scenario that you could not do when we were in more lockdown mode, where market shares were well established, behaviors were well known. You know, I learned a valuable lesson playing golf with my foursome, and that is, you know, their approach is, if you can't win the game, change the rules. Didn't go where I aimed it, it doesn't count. Visual obstruction from the sun, you know, all of these things. This is a change the rules time. And what it means is that some of the positions that were well established and fortified before, they're now slightly vulnerable. And so it becomes a brave new world. As Sarah put it, this is really a time of great opportunity for marketers, if we have the money to do it.
Yeah. And I would build on that and just say, I think when I think about, let's talk about the whole value proposition on the way through, just to extend Ken's suggestion, which is, I wouldn't spend less. I may not be spending it in the market, you know, buying advertising, but I might be applying those dollars to improving the service and value proposition of building out my e-commerce capabilities in a more robust manner, of, you know, reinvesting behind a loyalty program or my customer experience set, reevaluating what the differentiators are going to be going forward. And that's where the money would go. You know, certainly there's some organizations out there who are struggling, and, you know, they probably have to cut in order just to survive. But those that have the liberty to be able to invest, this is time to really set yourself up for the future. And certainly.
And beyond just Marcom. I mean, this is, as Bryan points out, you got to put your money, and Sarah said it, you got to put your money where your mouth is.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, do you want to have any final thoughts on that?
Well, I was recognizing I had talked about scaling back marketing. And I think when I made that reference, you know, it might be exactly more like Bryan's point, that it's a shift, because there's very tactical things that have changed. Like, you know, we have a big sponsorship with all the big sports teams. Well, you're not spending those, you know, marketing dollars. Or if you are we're planning out of home billboards, you're probably not doing those anymore. Or street teams and experiential marketing to try to get awareness in the early days of a brand launch. Speaking from experience, like all of those things are dollars you will not spend. It doesn't mean that you should do no marketing. You know, there's ways to introduce and to focus on digital channels, like I had mentioned, search, social display, online video. Like these become more important as those become less available. So I think I'm relating to what they said. It's definitely the worst thing to do would probably be to either do nothing or to stick to the plan you had before, because neither is going to work. So
I think there's another thing in just the dynamic world of innovation is, this is a time also, and Ken alluded to this, is where you can fail fast, where you can go out and try things. And, you know, I think the consumer is willing to give you a certain amount of leeway on not getting it perfect, but that you're trying to affect change or create a new value service or a new approach to something. And it's a great time to experiment and basically up your cycle time so if there's something that marketers or businesses shouldn't worry about, is trying to get everything perfect. I think that for sure is an opportunity, and that might get you a couple more cycles of innovation. Right.
I hate to say this, but we're out of time. I know we can just keep doing this. You three are so fascinating, and I know our audience would be really delighted to keep asking you things because the questions keep coming in. But I fear that this is where I have to market our Queen's Executive Education Program. So you just give me one moment. So Queen's Executive Education, every week I remind our audience that there are lots of opportunities to pursue remote learning through live interactive streaming. If you go to the URL on your screen, smithqueens.com/execed, you will find lots more information about programs. I particularly want to draw your attention to a program in strategic planning and leading change, which is coming up starting May the 12th. So this is the time, perhaps a good time to hunker down and learn something. So I hope everyone enjoyed today's panel discussion, and I hope people will join us next week for another one. This one will be called Canada's Next Move, What Happens After the Pandemic? And I'll be speaking with a panel of international business and government policy experts about the long-lasting implications of this pandemic, particularly how it will impact the way we do business, how it will impact the economy, the way global supply chains operate, and how government policies will be affected. I'm sure it will be very interesting. So next week, April 30th at 1 o'clock. Ken, Sarah, Bryan, you've been fantastic. We are so grateful that you've been able to offer your insights with us today. Sarah, lots of luck with the launch of Voila. Ken and Bryan, thank you for your insights as well. It's been really fantastic. So thank you to our audience also for tuning in, and hopefully
thank you.
Enjoy the afternoon.
For us too, so thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, good.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice afternoon.
Bye-bye.